Well, each week here in Oklahoma Horizon, we try to look out on the horizon to give you insight into our changing future. And today, we'll do just that, but with a slightly different tack. In today's show, we're going to look back at our past to gain a better understanding of our future. And no one is better suited to help us do that than today's guest, Bob Blackburn from the Oklahoma History Center. Thank you for being here. Please join me.
Good day.
Well, Bob, we're certainly in some interesting times in terms of our economy, but you say we've seen all this before.
We have. There's one thing about Oklahoma's economy that we can always expect, the boom and bust cycles. We were created with booms. The land run of 1889 was one of the biggest booms in not just Oklahoma history, but American history. That morning, no legal settlers in the unassigned lands. That evening, 50,000 people claiming that is a boom in one day. Well, not only did we begin with booms, we would continue with booms in the oil patch, the commodities up and down. Our economy has been a story of dramatic rises, of dramatic falls. Well, we know that times have been good before. Right now, we're in a bit of a dip, but it will come back. It's a matter of digging in, surviving, working with each other, finding this Oklahoma spirit of overcoming challenges, turning that into opportunities, building for a better future, and I think most importantly, keeping alive a sense of hope that tomorrow will be better than today, and that we should invest, we should roll the dice, take a chance, and invest in that new business, go into this new career, start new initiatives, and never give up. And there's so many stories in Oklahoma history that's a proven quality here in Oklahoma.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the Dust Bowl in particular. That was such a formative time for our state.
It was. Unfortunately for Oklahoma, we had gone through about 25 years of rapid expansion from 1898 to about 1920, early 20s. The rains were back, prices for crops were up, oil booms every 2 to 3 years. We went from 5 congressmen in 1907 to 9 congressmen by 1930. But then started drought, depression, people leaving the farms for cities, the decline of our rural economy, people having to say, we're going to hang on, we're going to stay on the farm. And then you get the dust storms that are this dramatic symbol of the hard times. We remember the dust storms because it's so dramatic. It's more difficult to understand the impact of tractors and mechanization and declining commodity prices on the world market. But all of this comes and affects Oklahoma not only through the 30s, but the 40s. We lost more population in Oklahoma in the 1940s than we did in the 30s. But all of these hard times would test the Oklahoma spirit. Our grandparents, our parents went through this, what we call the greatest generation, the people who survived the Depression and fought the Nazis in World War II and came back and started building a new state. We are the beneficiaries of their investments. It's incumbent on our generation and our kids to have that same attitude. Yeah, we have revenue shortfalls, we have budget cuts, opportunities aren't quite as great as they may have been 4 and 5 years ago, but we're going to do it anyway. We're not going to give up. We're not going to duck and cover. We're just going to forge ahead. They did that in the 1920s and the 1930s. They did it during World War II. They've done it ever since. And I think our current generation has to learn from history and to follow in those footsteps.
I think something that's interesting because we knew about all the economic troubles of the 1930s and of course the drought, but there was another drought in the 1950s that affected much of rural Oklahoma.
That's right. We call it the filthy 50s. And it was a second series of droughts. Crop prices were still low. And not only was farming suffering in the 50s, but the oil and gas community was just about at rock bottom. During the 1930s, the price of oil went down to 10 cents a barrel, 10 cents a full barrel. Well, it did not get quite that badly, but it was down to $2 a barrel in the 1950s. Today, we're talking about $80, $90 oil, $2 a barrel at this time. Oil companies were going out of business. A lot of the old fields discovered from 1905 to 1928, the last being Oklahoma City, of the giant fields. These were depleting, and it looked like oil and gas exploration would go overseas. But fortunately, we had people like Lew Ward and Harold Hamm. And then following in their footsteps would be John and Larry Nichols and Aubrey McClendon and today's current leaders in the oil and gas industry. They would help bring us out of that depression of the 1950s that would hit a boom in the late 70s with deep gas, with the Robert Hefners going into the deep Anadarko. Of course, we all know the second Great Depression in 1982. We survived that. Although we did not have the social suffering in the 1980s that we had in the 1930s, I believe as a historian that business was suffering just as much in the late 80s and early 90s as business was suffering in the late 1930s. And so we survived that. And then about 94, 95, 96, things start improving again. And that is the most recent boom. So agricultural prices start going up. The price for oil and gas starts going up by 98. This is 1998, 1999. And then it just keeps going. And you see changes in towns like Oklahoma City with the MAPS projects downtown, and Tulsa. You see it in the BOK and the projects there. You see it in Enid, where we're building a new $9 million facility, a new museum on the Cherokee Outlet. You see it in communities like even Muskogee and Fort Gibson and Lawton with the new museums on Fort Sill. We have just gone through a 10-year boom. Now we've hit a bit of a flat spot. If we can keep that from dipping too low and pull our resources back together and keep working together. So Stillwater and Norman have got to work together. Lawton and Anadarko have to work together. Enid and Ponca City have to work together. If we can continue doing this, I know that times will get better quickly. Revenues will start going back up. New jobs will be created. There'll be another boom, and all of a sudden we will begin to forget the last recession, just as we don't remember the Great Depression of the 1980s or the Great Depression of the 1930s in many ways. So we're going through this evolutionary process of building a state, and there will be problems just like there are victories. And we've just got to remember that history is cyclical, and we've got to learn from the mistakes, learn from our victories, and hopefully replicate that.
Yeah, and learn from those successes. Well, certainly an interesting perspective. And when we come back, I want to visit with you about some of the personalities that has formed our state.
This week's Oklahoma Moment is brought to you by the Oklahoma History Center.
After passage of a bond issue, Oklahoma City produced a film in 1951 to update its citizens on the construction progress.
Air view of the Classen traffic circle. Now come down to earth. This view looks eastward toward the western overpass. Looking south from the circle into Classen. New surface in the unit block. Madhouse scene is between Broadway and Robinson. One block is being rebuilt at a bite. We are nosing down over Hefner. Bond issue set up the funds for doubling the Hefner filter plant. 8 new engines made by the Boardman Company of Oklahoma City. 3 65-foot ladder trucks, Seagraves, big babies that cost $35,000 a copy. Opening ceremony at the Capitol Hill Branch Library, Southwest 26th and Hudson. Mrs. Walter Gray, chairman of the board, cut the ribbon. Charles M. Suttle built this plant for $193,000. Interior shows the children's section on the second floor. The last view was taken on the main floor, just inside the entrance.